Hello, everyone. Welcome to Avarash's World. Today, we have a very special guest, Mehrsa Baradaran. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much, Arash.
Great. And so I'd like to start off with a tough question first, and it's going to get
Mhm.
easier. How would you briefly describe yourself to our audience here? What would you say?
I'm a law professor at UC Irvine, and I'm a writer. I write about banking policy, usually inequality, finance, money, all things related to that kind of stuff. Yeah, so I've just come out with my third book. Yeah, there's personal stuff. I'm an Iranian immigrant. Grew up in Iran, came to America when I was 9, and I have 3 daughters.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
wonderful. Thanks so much. So the book is we're going to talk about is the Quiet Coup, Neoliberalism and the Looting of America. Now, I find it interesting when we say the words coup and looting, neoliberalism is not the first thing that comes to our mind.
Right. Right, because it's an ideology. And that's what was difficult about this book, in that, people like to have villains, or, this thing, these people did this thing and this is the cause. And I'm saying that this is an ideology, that yes, there were people that did things that looked like a coup and there were causality, but that really the thing that oppresses us, the thing that is the problem, is the ideology itself and how it got embedded into the laws after those things happened. So I'm following the idea.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And that's why it's quiet, because it's kind of, we don't perceive it
Yes.
as it slowly gains foothold. And I love it how we also say it's not an issue of left versus right. It's really like
Mhm.
something that creeps up on us. And how did
Yes.
it happen? When did it happen? Was it really during the 60s, right? So when things
Mhm.
were shaking and moving, and there seemed to be like a backlash or pushback in
Mhm.
that sense, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Some to the extent that people talk about neoliberalism, they talk about it as a 1980s Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher type ideology that was a free market ideology. So one, that it was an economic ideology, and two, that its rollout was in the 80s. Now, those things, it is true that there was a rollout of economic transformation in the 1980s, but neoliberalism starts in the 1940s, 1950s, in through the Mont Pelerin Society, and doesn't really gain traction because it's really this anti-Stalin, anti-Soviet Union kind of Cold War reaction. But really, what gains a foothold, what makes neoliberalism gain a foothold into American policy, is the 1960s worldwide transformations that were happening. So there was the American part of it that people focus on, the civil rights movement, the just general justice movements here. But there is a whole global context. If you look abroad, from 1960 to 1970, almost every country in Africa, Southeast Asia, and South and Central America was a former colony of one of 5 European nations. And in that era, there's just a complete transformation of global power. And that is the impetus for this ideology of neoliberalism, which is a backlash to, let's say, the freedom fights. And neoliberalism says, basically, look, all these people are saying freedom, and freedom including national sovereignty, the rights to negotiate with these, corporations that are in their countries. So like oil in the Middle East, copper in South and Central America, et cetera. And then the backlash essentially is, that is against the free market. So it's like a very subtle perversion of these ideas of freedom and free markets, even into, oh, we're going to revive, Adam Smith, these notions of capitalism, and really rebut these very righteous claims for autonomy and freedom from these other countries with this idea that they're anti-capitalist, that they're, communist, but more so just that this would ruin the free market if you allowed these countries sovereignty and the people in America, the civil rights movement. So that's when neoliberalism gains a foothold. It's in the Nixon administration. There are coups also, right? So there are loud coups and quiet coups at that time, and this was just one part of that empire's ability to maintain power in a different way, for sure, but still maintain that status quo.
And talk about up to that point, the Supreme Court was pretty reasonable, and then things shifted, right,
Mm-hmm.
in a different direction.
Right,
So what I found
right.
fascinating is how also they're presenting these ideas, and we talk about freedom, we talk about liberalism, we talk about democracy, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
that. I know
It's
and
not
that's
that.
kind of, and the rule of law. And I find like often
Yeah,
like people talk about the rule of law, but then it seems it doesn't apply to them. There's a double standard there. And I find that very dangerous. This is what fascists do, and this is what others do as well.
exactly.
I mean, it happens on communists do as well, right? So it's kind of like
Exactly.
interesting how that was
The hip
presented and people bought it in many cases.
the problem is the hypocrisy. It is not anything that neoliberalism said is not the problem. Of course, free markets are great. We have nothing close to a free market. It doesn't even resemble a free market. They wouldn't know a free market if they hit him in the head, right? And that's what I'm doing here is like, look, and the problem here too is that, oh, people now see, oh, if that's capitalism, we're anti-capitalism, and therefore we must be socialism. But,
Yeah.
Stalin was as much of a tyrant as, any empire was, right? There was no global empire at the time that had democracy. There was no global empire at the time that had communism or capitalism. Empire is empire. If you're taking resources from countries and not paying for them, that's not capitalism, right? So that's the original lie. That's, the British lie is like, oh, we have capitalism. Meanwhile, we're sucking in all of these resources based on these contracts that we made at the barrel of a gun, So that system, right? We've talked about that system, and that system was no longer maintainable after the Nazis took the British ideology and turned it on Europe. And that's when you get the UNHCR, you get the Geneva Conventions, you get this whole, we can't do this anymore, right?
Yeah.
And then these international laws come to the fore. And so empire can no longer have, I say, the sort of alibi of like, oh, well, racial domination or whatever, because the Nazis really distorted and used it as it was and added on to it. And after that, it's like, well, how do you maintain, you lost the alibi, but you still have the motive of empire, right? The motive has always been about exploitation, and Europe needed those resources. And the wars actually proved it more so. Like, the country that was able to gain power over the supply lines was the ones who won. And so then it's like, well, we need to keep these, we don't want to leave these countries or pay for the oil. So how do we do that with a new ideology? And so in chapter 2 of the book, I call it, Empire's New Clothes, or I don't remember what the final chapter title was, but that's essentially what I wanted to call it. Is this is what they came up with, to come up with a new ideology. And the tragedy is that there were so many conversations at that time, so much of a global shift in power and understanding, and also enabled by technology. You have, for the first time, televisions from 1960 until 1970. We went from 4% of Americans to almost 100% having a television in their home. That is one of the reasons the civil rights movement is able to succeed, is people can see it. You have air flights. Martin Luther King goes to India. Malcolm X goes to Mecca. You've got these global freedom struggles. Shariati goes to, Paris and translates Fanon to take it back to Iran. There's a real merging of ideas, this cross-pollination of both ideas about freedom and sovereignty and the ideas, the empire's players kind of meeting together to convene on these things. So that's those are the two different tracks that I'm following in that part of the book.
The various thoughts that come to mind as you're speaking. But one of the things I was noticing with technology, I mean, this is something, it seems like a cycle, because I find like what's happening now is in a way a mirror image of what was happening then. And so we might think that decolonization is something new. No, that was from that era. So I think it's fascinating, but it also means we haven't solved the issues, right? Maybe we have a second.
We haven't solved. This is it's what's the tragedy is, like, it happened during Reconstruction also. If you look back, there are these moments, 1776, Adam Smith wrote Wealth of Nations in 1776, the same moment that Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. There have been these moments, these interregnums between one power structure and another. And the problem in these previous moments is that the sort of, they were thwarted by new ideologies, right? So that is the work of scholars, I hope, is to go and to unravel what is this ideology that maintained this power structure, and that ideology dies. But to be very watchful that the same power structure doesn't come forward with a new ideology. And this is where we're at right now. We are at an interregnum. I think it started maybe the last several years. You see, the Black Lives Matter, the protests against Palestine, the just general distrust, the conspiracy theories, these crazy elections, the rule of law basically falling apart, institutional distrust, widespread, the rise of the populist right, and the general, I mean, I don't think there's a country in the world that has the support of a majority of its citizens if it was a majority vote. Not one nation. And that is saying not one, you know, and you look at our choices in these elections. And so we're definitely at a pivot point, and I am very hopeful about this pivot point. I think there's reasons the last ones didn't work out, but it's really important as we're in this one. I think this election looks to me to mirror 1968 exactly in America. And that one, you had a forceful movement towards civil rights. And, you know, at that point, the FBI had to kill, you know, like killed some people to get what they wanted. And I think that was thwarted. The civil rights movement did not succeed. You know, we think about it, but we've retold that story because it failed. And so I think it's important to know the last pivot while we're in this one, but we are definitely in an interregnum again.
What I'm worried about is just distrust amongst each other, amongst the parties, the government, and even like economy and all that. So there's always this idea of an agenda, and it's based on truths. I mean, there is corruption, and so corporations are untouchable, and that is a valid point from when also the right is upset with certain things, and they come up with conspiracy theories that are not based in fact, but some of them might be, or there's an inkling of it that explains frustration. And I think that's where we can get together and come together and try to solve this, because we're not clear, and people are not clear who is really the enemy. And it's also not clear that there's certain things that's in there. And just when we talk about neoliberalism, I find it interesting. They say no laws, we want freedom and so on, but then they have more laws which help them, and then you have loopholes and you have protection and bailout. And so it could have been different, because there was a time where the corporations were seen to help the common good, to help the well-being of society for their own benefit, not because they're good and altruistic, but because it helps business.
Sure. The market is not this thing that exists out there like some, you know, force of nature, you know, and this is the irony of it. It's like, oh, the market is a force of nature and you can't mess with it. And if you mess with it, bad things will happen. Well, if it's a force of nature, it shouldn't need human intervention. But it's always been the case that the market is made of rules, right? We decide what is an asset. We decide what is capital. We code it. We, through the common law, decide what contracts to uphold and what is the corporation allowed? I mean, the corporation itself is a creature of the law. That's, the original point of a corporation is the law creates it and sets up its parameters and says what it can do. And so that was the lie is, oh, this free market ideology is about less law. But what it did exactly is to change the law. And this goes into the institutional distrust is when you say to people, oh, the law is bad, and we need to unravel it. And so, so they don't pay attention here, where actually what's happening is more laws and more complexity under the guise of this free market. What we have now is a system of like pay to play. The regulators determine what corporations can do. And those, banks and corporations, it's like a revolving door within the agencies. They lobby for the laws that they want, which feed into more money, which feed into more laws. It's like this very nice loop, and it's not a conspiracy because it's out there in plain sight. It's just very complicated. It's very historic. And so that is the danger, coming back to your earlier point of people understand that something's not right. People understand, let's say, Trump and Bernie Sanders both said the market is rigged or the game is rigged, let's say. Okay, people understand that core intuition. And what Trump does with it is point to some people. It's like a very punitive, very resentful message. And others will, maybe point to other people, but more of a, okay, we can fix it together kind of thing. And I see this, in a lot of the past eras of fascism. The thing that happens before the fascists take over is exactly this. It's widespread corruption that mounts and puts pressure on a system and distrust. And people tend to think, oh, it's the left that comes in, but it's never the left. It's always the right. Stalin was the right. The Nazis were the right. It's the people who come in and say, we will fix it by power and violence. Call it left, right. It's just authoritarian fascism. It happened in my country, our country of Iran, is when you have a puppet regime that is an outside regime, and everyone understands that this is corrupt. Most people understand, and you have a nationwide revolution, and it is this radical right that was always there but was not a majority, that then comes and takes in, and then rule of law can disappear overnight, and shift into something brutal. I mean, we've been under fascist. I mean, Iran has been under fascist rule for 45 years. That is what fascism looks like. You cannot speak. How many Iranians have had to die or be exiled for this regime to hold its place? And so that I'm informed by that, seeing what happened in my childhood. I was born in 1978. I wasn't there before. I just saw the horror of, Iran post-revolution, and it informed everything I do, and that these were regular, good people. These men that were carrying out these orders looks like my cousins. And I think that that's how it works. It is just you build up hate and resentment, and then give these people guns. And I don't think any country is immune from that kind of thing. And so it was a hard book to write because I do see that coming here. In who knows how long it'll take, but that's a solution to corruption. That's one way that in the past people have solved it, is through violent revolution.
And in the case of Iran, we had the Shah, and we had the prison system, and people were imprisoned, and a lot of the clerics were imprisoned there too. So they experienced it.
Exactly.
And then they said, we will stop this. We will get rid of the prison system. And that's the hypocrisy again, because they expanded it.
Yeah, exactly.
And so they should have known, because they experienced it themselves. So I don't understand that disconnect, and
what's the othering? It's like, well, we do it, it's fine. It's, and this is, unless it's a non-violent, everyone is involved revolution. And this is where the us versus them. And that is also what informed me. Like, look, our enemy are these ideas, are these bad ideas and abstract ideas. It's not just neoliberalism that is the idea that I'm going after. It's also the idea of capital, or the movement of capital, the capital having its own force. It's like a virus. A virus you saw shut down the world, right? And all a virus wants to do is propagate itself. It's like a cancer. And I think we have that in capital right now. All capital wants is to multiply itself as fast as it can, no matter what human costs. And we allowed capital to do that starting in the 1960s. And we're at this stage now where it's not even profitable, but it's so soul-sucking. It's feeding, houses and livelihoods and hours and children and, health into this machine that multiplies zeros on balance sheets faster than any human could put it to good use. Mm-hmm. That's the world we're in now.
That's exactly it. And I think that's the problem. I mean, it's not an issue of, again, capitalism, communism. It's really that greed. And I think that greed, or looking for power, and that's the danger, because where maximum benefit, where does it stop? If that's your raison d'être.
Well, greed is always, always more. Greed is always there. It's always more, but it's also the algorithm. It's the algorithm that allows for that, because it's greed, but we're almost pawns. People are worried about AI, and I kind of feel like we're already in it. We're already in a system. The market is so complex and so algorithmic that there isn't a hand stirring it. It is its own beast at this point, has been for a while. And so I think it's more that. It's like the humans just need to stop the algorithm that is already going. And yes, greed, of course, you'd rather be on top of it than under it, But this is the problem with these things, is that soon the majority of us will be under it. And the few at the top can't even see the full thing. And then there's the higher the inequalities, the greater the desperation at the top to maintain that grip on power. And I think we've been there for a while.
It's a lack of convictions and values too, because if you, as a politician, if your aim is just to become a president and you don't have any ideas or any principles or anything like that, then that's not good, because you can flip flop and I changed my mind, right? And I prefer someone I disagree with, but at least is honest in his or her opinions, right? And it's like, at least they're predictable as well.
Yeah, well, it's the nature of evil. I mean, Hannah Arendt went to a Nazi trial and she talked about the nature of evil. It's not, if you're looking for evil people, you're never going to find them. The nature of evil is just blindness and moral, like you just don't care. You don't want to see. And you choose not to see, and you choose to just kind of go numb to the pain of others and just participate in, like the Nazi, truly, like there were just good people going home to their houses after a good day's work that were part of that. And, we want to see these like gremlins and these trolls that were Nazis. They weren't, right? They weren't. They were regular. And that's hard. That's a hard thing for us humans to see. Yeah. Because we don't want to see ourselves in those people, but that is us also. That is us.
They're a danger as well, and that's what it shows, the banality of evil. And so when Hannah Arendt went to see the trial, she wanted to see this monster, and she saw this bureaucrat, and it's just like this boring
it's a bureaucrat.
person, bland.
But of course,
in a glass cage because they saw him as violent, and then he said he can't do anything. He's just doing minor things. He didn't. But what I found fascinating is he kind of split his conscience from what he was doing. He says, yes, I'm following orders. I know it's kind of wrong. I have nothing against the Jews myself, but I had to follow orders. And that's dangerous too, because that's what authoritarianism thrives on. Exactly.
Fear, they create a system of fear and punishment, and then every cog in the machine follows the leader. And and everyone wants, if you're just self-interested, if you're just about, well, what makes sense for me and nobody else, then you're going to get stuck in that system and you're going to be doing evil. And I have some examples in the book. I go back to the torture memos, which were, for me, I read them when they came out. I was in law school when they came out, but I recently reread them, and I was like, this is just the very definition of evil, is to take a sentence that says, basically, don't torture people. Don't intentionally inflict harm on another human being in your captivity. And you have an 81-page memo, another 51-page memo saying, what does it mean to intentionally inflict? And in the Oxford Dictionary, intentional means, but like really just missing the forest by focusing on truth on purpose, intentionally. They wanted to torture. And these lawyers who are never going to do the torture themselves, but they created the justification for it. And those are the people that I focus on, because those are my people, right? The academics, the legal thinkers who do the dirty work of the intellectual foundation. And that's in my book on the neoliberals. I go after these guys like Friedman and Beetz. These are evil guys. They're just intellectual frauds, and very eloquent, very persuasive, and fear-based, and making the case for empire and fooling people, with these fancy words and their algorithms that I think they knew what they were up to, but didn't care.
Yeah, as I was reading your book, this line from Bob Dylan came to mind: steal a little and they throw you in jail. They put you in jail, steal a lot and they make you king. And I think that's that as well, and you got the minor offenses that are punished, but then the major ones go away scot-free.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, if you create an ideology that becomes a reigning ideology, then, it's like the Nazi ideology, right? It was like, it's all or nothing kind of framework. It's either this is the ruling thing, or you should go to prison because you're committing treason against democracy. And that, I do think that there was a lot of treason happening in the Nixon administration. We had these laws on the books to civil rights, and integrate, and they were able to get around them through legal maneuvering. And the majority of the country voted for those civil rights laws. The majority of the country wanted not everybody, certainly there were always people, but to use the minority of people to create a whole framework. I think they used race. Race wasn't even the front end. Race was always a weapon to cut people so that the corporate greed can get into the law. That was the motivating factor. It's just greed and fear and a refusal to just consider yourself to be one of humanity and try to stay above it, And then there was like the dirtier stuff, like the Kissinger bombing Cambodia secretly for, years. And so there was that, and the FBI's murdering of civil rights leaders. There was the uglier stuff, but this was just as ugly because it was just the soft power of it.
I'm very interested in the founding fathers too, and I've read books and I've done podcasts on that, and I just find it fascinating, just the American experiment. And so democracy is messy, but they tried to make it in the Constitution to take that into account. But then the problem is it's the people. It's the constitution is not the issue. It's the people that can interpret it, can change it, the judges, and so on. So we have to be very careful because people want easy and quick solutions or simple ones, right? That you can follow. But democracy is messy, and yes, you will be criticized, and it doesn't matter. It can be your friend criticizing you. It comes from good intentions, but I find we're blocking that off. Now you can't criticize anybody on any side on anything. And that's the opposite of democracy.
Well, we don't. It is. We don't have a democracy. I mean, to be honest, like this is. I go back to the W.E.B. Du Bois quote that I cited in 2 books because I found it that important. In that he says, the main problem with American democracy, is that it's never been tried. You can't have a democracy. Women got the vote in 19. Black people got the vote in 1965, and even since then, you've got the Electoral College splitting and splicing the vote. You have basic disenfranchisement. We've got a war. What was the last American war that had a majority of even the congressional vote? We're not voting on these wars. This is a proxy war fought on with the weapons, and there was never a vote. And that's not a democracy, right? So you see these student protesters and people are like, oh, they shouldn't be doing that. And yes, whatever, maybe some of them have gotten out of hand, but how are you supposed to voice dissent? I remember being out on the streets in the Iraq War, and it was just, they voted on that one at least, but it was a close vote and there was lies. They lied about it to get the vote, Sure. And so how are you supposed to say, I don't want to be, I'm part of this country that's doing this horrible thing. And in a democracy, how are you supposed to be the part of the majority that opposes it? And that, I think, so I think it's an interesting political system. It's not a democracy in that sense of the world.
And it's ruled by money. It's ruled by power. It's ruled by corporations.
Yes, that's the other thing. And that's the other thing.
And honesty as well. So a lot of people who go into politics tend not to be honest, but if they are, they will become corrupt because sometimes they're forced, sometimes because that's how it goes in many ways.
Yes, exactly.
But I found also fascinating, and as you're mentioning these rights that are won, it takes effort. But for me, it was surprising the Miranda rights because I took them for granted. I was like, of course. That had to come through a court decision and ruling. So it's important to keep advancing. But on the other hand, I think we're not in a bad place. I mean, we're in a dangerous place. I agree with that. But we've made strides. And we continue to make strides. And I think we have to keep the momentum going. That's my point here.
Absolutely. Well, there's the institution and then there's humanity. And humanity has been on an evolutionary up. We are more enlightened, more, even just the technology, we were going back to that point, often these technologies of war are created and then humans end up occupying the technology and using it for connection, or maybe it's a technology for capitalism, right? So social media or whatever, but then we use it to come toward each other, right? I mean, we've never been able to, within a second, through your cell phone, be in someone's house in China to see their funny reel or something. That is a proximity to humanity that has changed us in fundamental ways, and yet our institutions haven't caught up yet. We're still, you've got the cell phone footage, and I think you can't underestimate the cell phone footage of George Floyd and this war as fundamentally changing our hearts in majority wise. I mean, the George Floyd protests were worldwide. And there's something about being right there to see the machine, and its brutal effects. And I think in that way, absolutely. And that's why it's so rough right now, because there's just this friction that the institutions are hard to change, and they change slowly and they fall kind of weird, I think suddenly sometimes, and yet we're so beyond. I mean, that's why we've got octogenarians, 80-year-olds running most of the countries of the world, and the ones that aren't are, won't name names, but in that vein of old world thinking, we're still in a Cold War, we're going to solve our problems with weapons and armies, where we're in a technology universe, and it's very outdated, to resolve a dispute over, say, that Taiwan microchip factory that is the hub of the entire economy. The dispute is, they've got two armies pointing at this factory that is the entire world economy. That's not the solution. So I think we just need an update.
Yeah, exactly. I love how you say we need to recalibrate the system. The system itself is okay. It can work, but we just have to change it. And we want to be careful because I'm suspicious of revolutions just because of
Me
personal
too.
experience, right?
Same.
And so
That's
things
why.
could get
Yes.
much worse. So I'm never
Yes.
advocating for that. But I think we need to again recalibrate.
I'm not either.
Keep the things
I'm not
that
either.
work. Try to improve those parts, and that's the more important. But I feel that a lot of people just bring a lot of aggression to it, whatever side they're on. Yeah, and so that is not going to help the issues in many cases.
If your revolutionary ideology has vengeance in it and punishment, then that's exactly what fascism is. So if your revolution doesn't include every single human being and isn't generous and empathetic, and this is, again, I do think our war is against ideas. It's against ideologies and memes, bad algorithms that got put in and are self-reproducing. It's not against people. It's not us versus them. There is no them. There's no cabal. There's no conspiracy. It is just a whacked out system. And then just some fearful administrators that are just kind of doing their job. And so I see a revolution in that nothing happens. Everyone just sit right there. We recalibrate monetary system. We let everyone kind of free from these debts and allow them to do what they want to do and incentivize through a monetary. Money's magic. Money can be as fungible and flexible as we are capable of producing economically. So I would see a world where, I don't think, and I also don't think humans are inherently violent. I think if we eradicated borders tomorrow, change the money system, we would have a slight fear, for the first few minutes. But if we had everything set up, we would just get to work. We have no scarcities in this world. There's no reason to fight for food. We have more food waste than there is hunger. We're wasting so much food, right? And there is scarcity here and then just glut. And it's just a recalibration in that system also. And I think we're all suffering because of these things. We've got just these polarities, and that's all because of inequality. And I don't think anyone's benefiting. Even if you're a billionaire right now, you've got a bunker and a yacht, you're far from humanity. You're stateless, and that maybe you can maintain that for a bit, but like rising seawaters and revolutions and all of the scary stuff, you're not immune from that. And so I think that's the fundamental thing, is like, we're in this together. And if we are, then let's make it work for everybody. And without taking from one person to give to another, we can actually live in an abundant economy easily. Money isn't scarce. The only thing that's scarce is our ideologies and ideas about other human beings.
The thing is also the trust, though. I mean, even with money, there's no gold standard. So we have to trust that our money is worth something and might not be worth anything tomorrow, or might not accept your money anymore. And so that's one thing. But we also have a trust when I cross the road. I expect people to stop when the traffic lights are red. And so we need to work on that, to have that trust. And I think that that
is the linchpin of this whole thing. Is I think people don't realize how close we are to losing trust in rule of law. And when you lose trust in rule of law, it's like the Taliban in Afghanistan. Quickly, the guys with the most weapons will take over that vacuum. Okay, so I think that, and then also trust in money. Our entire monetary system is based on us trusting it. And I think both of those, like, linchpins are, people assume that they're law or heavy, they're attached to something, and they're not. It's like vibes, and vibes shift fast. And so I think those are the risks. The risks are you stop trusting and we don't trust anything. And that's the most dangerous thing. That is the most, I think I had a paragraph, I don't know if it made it in the book, but like, the thing about humanity is that we're not homo economicus, we're homo trusticus, right? We have evolved through cooperation and trust, multiplied our talents and created way bigger things than we could have by forming larger groups of people and coordinating ourselves. And we're at that crisis point. It's just that we need to take that extra step. That's been a necessary step from 1960 that we've been avoiding and pushing out, which is that we're one world, right? North, South, black, white, woman, man, no difference.
No, absolutely, 100%. And I think like the problem is also freedom and how it's presented. And so I think we have to be very careful. Even individualism, I think it's great. It's wonderful. But again, it comes to balance with collectivism. There's somewhere in between. You're not one or the other. And with freedom, responsibility is tied to that. Freedom does not mean I can do whatever I want. I have to follow certain things within society. If I'm living on an island on my own, I could do whatever I want. Right. That's not much fun.
Yes. Well, yes. And we're not even close to freedom now. I don't think we understand freedom because I also think that when you live in a world where I think freedom is an all or nothing prospect. I think when we live in a world where a person can fall off the freedom spectrum and just be, insofar as those girls in Iran are under that regime, and insofar as those, kids in Africa are in those cobalt mines, insofar as, so there's black kids getting, I don't live in a free world. And I don't mean that just like ethically, like Martin Luther King says, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I mean it literally. It is a threat to my freedom, to know that freedom is scarce and limited. And freedom is one of those things that if you make it scarce, it's not real. If you make it abundant, it is more real. We've been trying to like limit freedom and limit justice, but that's not, and that's back to democracy. Either everyone participates and it's an actual democracy, or it's not, and stop calling it that. Right? Because you're ruining the idea of democracy, and someone's going to say democracy hasn't worked. Let's try fascism, right? That's the danger, is free markets don't work. Let's try, we tell you the prices, So it's socialism was a response to not a free market. There was no free market in the world when Stalin took over. The British was not doing a free market. Let's be clear. Okay. That's not what that was. And so that's where you get these oppositional things based on like the assumptions are BS from the beginning. They were as communist as we were capitalist, which is, you don't even understand those terms,
So I'm wondering, what can we do? How can we solve this? Because as someone, an expert in law, I don't know if you would say we need more laws, but then again, if you're imposing things, that's not helping, right? So what would be the solution? Change of heart would be ideal, but again, that's another path.
I ended the book actually as a free market booster. Is I think the fastest way to justice at this point is the market. And so we invest in the future that we want. And truly, if someone will give me their $1 billion I'm an academic, so I'm not, I have a 401k, that's about it, but if someone wants to invest to change the world, I mean, start at the top. Why not do a leveraged buyout of the weapons manufacturers first, get that taken care of, retool them. Nobody loses their job, but now we're creating airplanes that are really great instead of drones. It's a money system. If money is controlling war, if money is lobbying for war, weapons are lobbying for war, right? It's about money. It's about shareholder profits. The wars of the last 40, 50 years haven't been about, they've really been money wars, and well, so if it's money deciding, let us get in that game. Okay. So if our vote can't do it, maybe we can vote with our feet. Maybe we can take our 401ks. And I'm in the process of like saying, I don't want to ask people for money. I don't want to create an investment vehicle, but it's very profitable. I think if you give 5 to 10 years, give a higher window, and all my 401k, I don't want, and it is invested in these blue chip stocks of like Exxon, Raytheon, Chase that I can't take out till I'm 65. I would rather take my money and put it into a new economy. So when I'm 65, the things that are profitable are like children's, like the children's vibrancy. If I can invest in that and have that economy, I actually think we're less risky, more profitable, right? Invest in justice, invest in communities that have never been invested in, right? As a profit, not for my good feelings, right? And that's the other problem, is they said, oh, these people are asking for money and it's against the free market to give it. It's like, no, it's the free market to make everyone equal so that people can bring their talents equally to the market, right? The only time we've had a free market was the Silk Road. And not to bring us Persians back into it, but the Persian Empire was the only empire. It was like a roads and infrastructure empire. It just created from Egypt to India a network of roads and markets. And all you had to do was pay tribute to Cyrus, and the kings. And yes, they got wealthy off of it, but they got wealthy. And it was the idea of abundance, right? The idea of paradise and lush and luxury rather than domination. The Persian empires didn't go to take over India to Egypt and make everyone Persian and, like rape and murder their way across the Middle East, like, Alexander the Great did, and the empire, the Romans, and so I think and then Adam Smith uses the Persian scholars when he's Persian and Arab, because there's Arab scholars actually created these free market ideologies. He's citing them through the Greeks, So at the time Adam Smith is writing Wealth of Nations, the free market was a historical anomaly. There was no free market in Europe. We had empire by that point. And because the second you go into, the Spanish go to South America and say, trade with us or else we'll murder you, and it's not trade. It's we will take your stuff and then you will work for us, instead of actually, can you imagine, like if they had created a Silk Road and we had just gotten all that rich knowledge, the sophisticated drugs and technologies that those civilizations that had no contact with each other had developed over hundreds of years. Instead, we said they're savages, kill them for gold that they took back to Europe and inflated it away and spent years fighting over, decades, centuries. So that's the original sin of, well, that's when the free market ended.
Yeah. But as you're saying, there is an abundance here. There's something that we can tap in. There's taking certain risk, changing things of how we used to do, and do something new, and it's going to pay off. I mean, it's again, everyone will benefit.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Wonderful.
Human genius is the most abundant resource we have,
Absolutely.
Human
ingenuity. AI can't go there. Yeah. That's a place that's our own domain.
No, yeah, but we created AI. We are a genius species, and we just need to unleash those ideas and the innovations and the markets that we could create if it was free, if we were free to do so.
Wonderful discussion. Thank you so much, Mehrsa Baradaran.
Thank you, Arash.
The Quiet Coup, Neoliberalism and the Looting of America. Now, it's such a fascinating read. It's easy to read, and I thought, law and legal terms and economy is also not my thing. It's fascinating, really well written, and thank you so much for being on Arash's World.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.